A millionaire walks out of a bakery with an expensive cake in his hands when a timid voice makes him stop. "Sir, would you trade your cake for these shoes?" It's a barefoot girl, no older than 7, holding a pair of worn-out shoes found in the trash. He feels something unusual in the desperation of those young eyes, and for a moment he hesitates between ignoring her or what he decides next leaves the little girl completely shocked. The autumn wind carried golden leaves down Fifth Avenue as Richard Sterling pushed open the glass door of La Belle Époque Pâtisserie. The golden bell announced his departure with a delicate chime as he carefully held the crystal box protecting a slice of Belgian chocolate cake, $15 that, to him, meant less than the loose change forgotten in his suit jacket pocket. At 52, Richard had built a real estate empire that afforded him luxuries like this artisanal dessert, but it had also erected invisible walls around his heart. His routine was as precise as a Swiss watch: office at 7, meetings until 5, a strategic stop at the patisserie to sweeten the end of his day, then home, where silence echoed through the empty rooms of his Upper East Side mansion. That afternoon, however, fate had prepared a twist that would change everything. He had barely taken 3 steps along the cobblestone sidewalk when a timid little voice made him stop. It was so quiet, it was almost lost in the noise of the traffic, but there was something in it that struck a dormant chord in his chest. "Sir, would you trade your cake for these shoes?" Richard turned slowly. Before him stood a girl no older than 8 and as frail as a wounded sparrow, with tangled brown hair framing a small face smudged with dried tears. Her bare feet contrasted sharply with the growing chill of the afternoon, and in her small, trembling hands she held a pair of used sneakers with holes in the sides and frayed laces. The contrast was brutal. He, impeccably dressed in his designer suit, holding $15 in the form of a cake, while she offered what she had likely found in the trash as if it were a treasure. The child's eyes shone with a mixture of hope and fear of rejection, and Richard felt something strange stir in his stomach, a sensation he hadn't experienced in decades. I found them in the trash, but they're almost new," she whispered, holding up the shoes like an offering. "My brother is so hungry, and the smell of your cake." The girl's voice broke. Richard glanced around, noticing for the first time how people hurried past, averting their eyes from the scene. Some even quickened their pace, as if poverty were contagious. He had always been like that himself, indifferent to panhandlers, to street vendors, to all the invisible humanity that populated the streets of his prosperous city. But something in those brown eyes, in that wounded dignity offering an honest trade instead of simply begging for a handout, completely disarmed him. The girl wasn't pleading, she was negotiating. There was pride in her slumped posture, a lesson in humanity his MBA had never taught him. "Well, what's your name?" he asked, surprised by his own voice. "Sophia," she answered, blinking rapidly as if trying to hold back new tears. "And my brother's name is Miguel. He's only 5 and he's really weak." Richard felt his chest tighten. There was something in the way she spoke of her brother, a fierce protectiveness mixed with quiet desperation, that made him rethink everything he believed about himself. For years, he had built his fortune by crushing competitors, closing deals without looking at the faces of those who lost their homes, living in a golden bubble where suffering was just a statistic in the newspapers. Now, faced with this child offering her only shoes for a piece of cake, Richard Sterling came face to face with his own forgotten humanity, and for the first time in decades, he didn't know what to do. The wind blew harder, making Sophia shiver. She lowered the shoes slightly, interpreting his silence as a refusal, and Richard saw the hope fading from those eyes that held secrets far too heavy for her age. In that instant, without knowing it yet, they were both on the verge of a journey that would transform their lives forever. Richard stood motionless for long seconds, watching Sophia slowly draw the shoes against her chest. The girl murmured a barely audible, "Sorry, sir," and began to turn away, her bare feet treading delicately on the cold stones of the sidewalk. Something inside him broke like an old dam. Without thinking about the consequences, without calculating the risks as he did in every business deal, Richard took 3 quick steps back toward the patisserie. "Wait," he called over his shoulder, making Sophia stop and look back, her eyes wide. The glass door opened again with the same delicate chime, but now the sound seemed different, more urgent, more human. Madame Dubois, the French owner of La Belle Époque, raised her perfectly arched eyebrows at seeing him return so quickly. "Monsieur Sterling, did you forget something?" "I want to buy all the cupcakes you have left today," he said, pulling his wallet from the inner pocket of his jacket, "all of them, and those sweet rolls from the display case too." Madame Dubois blinked several times, confused. In 3 years as a regular customer, Richard had never bought more than a single slice of cake. He always chose methodically, always paid the exact amount, always left without rush or fanfare. "But that's nearly 20 cupcakes, monsieur, and the rolls, that would be enough to feed an entire family." "Exactly," he replied, handing her $200 bills. "And please put everything in a sturdy bag." While Madame Dubois prepared the order with evident bewilderment, Richard looked through the window. Sophia was still standing on the sidewalk, clutching the old shoes, watching the patisserie with an expression that mixed curiosity and resignation. He noticed how she trembled, not just from the cold, but from a vulnerability that touched something deep in his hardened soul. Upon leaving again, Richard walked directly to her. Sophia took a step back, instinctively defensive, but didn't run. There was a quiet courage in that child that impressed him with every passing moment. "Sophia," he said, kneeling on the sidewalk to be at her level. His expensive suit touched the dirty ground, but it no longer mattered. "I accept your offer." The girl's eyes lit up like stars. "You really do? The shoes for the cupcakes?" "Not just for the cupcakes." Richard smiled, a genuine expression that hadn't visited his face in years. "For all of this." He held out the bag filled with pastries, and Sophia received it with trembling hands. The weight made her sway slightly, and she opened the bag with reverent care. Upon seeing the amount of food, her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of pure joy. "I can't take all of this just for the shoes," she whispered. "It's not fair to you." Richard took the old sneakers from her hands with the same delicacy he would handle a rare gem. "You know what I learned today? Sometimes, what seems like very little is worth more than we can imagine." Sophia didn't fully understand the meaning of his words, but she felt their sincerity. For the first time in weeks, a true smile lit up her smudged face, transforming her into an ordinary child, joyful, hopeful, full of life. "I have to take this to Miguel," she exclaimed, clutching the bag to her chest. "He's waiting on a corner nearby. He won't believe it when he sees so much food." "Go on," said Richard, standing up and adjusting his jacket. "And Sophia, if you need anything else." But she was already running down the sidewalk, the bag swinging to the rhythm of her bare feet, carrying with her the first spark of hope she had felt in a long time. Richard watched her until she disappeared around a corner, carrying not just pastries, but also a new possibility for them both. He looked down at the shoes in his hands, torn, worn, useless to any normal person. But in that moment, they represented something much greater, the beginning of a journey he didn't yet know where would lead. Sophia ran through the streets as if she were flying, her bare feet barely touching the cold ground, the heavy bag swung in her arms. But she didn't feel its weight, only the euphoria of having enough food for her and Miguel to get through several days without the constant anguish of hunger. She turned the corner onto Orchard Street and spotted the small silhouette huddled under the awning of an abandoned shop. Miguel was exactly where she had left him, wrapped in a tattered blanket they had found days ago. Even from a distance, Sophia could see him shivering. "Miguel, Miguel!" she called out, running the last few feet. The 5-year-old boy lifted his head, his large, dark eyes lit up when he saw his sister approaching with the mysterious bag. It had been weeks since he had seen Sophia so animated, and it made him momentarily forget the cold biting at his small bones. "Sophia, did you get something?" he asked in a hoarse voice, trying to stand but stumbling a little. She knelt beside her brother, placing the bag on the ground with a mother's care. I got more than something meager. I got a miracle." She opened the bag slowly, like someone unveiling a treasure. Miguel's eyes widened when he saw the colorful cupcakes, the golden sweet rolls, the decorated pastries that seemed to have come from a dream. For a moment, he was speechless. Is this all for us?" he whispered, reaching a trembling little hand toward a chocolate cupcake with pink frosting. "All ours," Sophia confirmed. Picking up the treat and offering it to him. "You can eat, there's plenty more." Miguel bit into the cupcake with reverence, as if it were the first food he had ever tasted. The sweet flavor filled his mouth, and he moaned with pleasure, closing his eyes to savor every crumb. It was better than any memory of food he had from when they still had a home, a family, a normal life. Sophia watched her brother eat with a smile that mixed joy and profound relief. For 3 weeks, since they had run away from the last shelter where they wanted to separate them, she had carried the weight of being responsible for Miguel. At 8 years old, she had become his mother, sister, protector, and his only family. "How did you get all this?" Miguel asked between bites, smearing his face with the sweet frosting. Sophia told him about the man in the elegant suit, about trading the old shoes for the pastries, about how he had knelt on the sidewalk to talk to her. Miguel listened intently, his eyes shining with admiration for his sister's courage. "Did he seem nice?" the boy asked, always wary of adults since they had been abandoned. "He seemed sad," Sophia answered thoughtfully, grabbing a sweet roll for herself. "Sad like us, but in a different way, like he'd lost something important a long time ago." They ate slowly, savoring each piece, knowing they needed to make the food last as long as possible. The autumn wind was blowing harder now, carrying the smell of rain. Sophia looked at the darkening sky and felt a tightness in her chest. "It just had to rain today," she murmured, pulling Miguel closer and adjusting the blanket around them both. The first drops began to fall, thick and cold. Sophia hugged her brother tightly, trying to shield him with her own body. Miguel coughed, that dry cough that had been worrying her for days and seemed to be getting worse with the cold. "Don't worry, Miguel," she whispered in his ear. "Tomorrow we'll find a better place to stay, and we still have enough food." But as the rain intensified and Miguel coughed more and more, Sophia couldn't shake the fear growing in her heart. Her brother was getting sick, and she didn't know what to do. For the first time since her encounter with the kind man, tears burned her eyes again. In the growing darkness of the night, 2 siblings warmed each other under a tattered blanket, sharing sweets and dreams as the storm closed in on their already fragile lives. Richard arrived home 3 hours later than usual, but for the first time in years, he didn't care about the accumulated emails or missed calls. He placed Sophia's old sneakers on the coffee table in the living room, studying them as if they were a complex work of art he needed to decipher. His mansion on the Upper East Side had always been a silent refuge, with its Persian rugs, expensive paintings, and designer furniture. But tonight, the silence felt oppressive, echoing with questions he couldn't answer. What had happened that afternoon? Why had a strange child so deeply shaken his certainties? He poured himself a 30-year-old single malt scotch, but the amber liquid brought no usual comfort. Every sip made him think of Sophia sharing cupcakes with her brother. Every minute reminded him of the quiet courage in the eyes of a girl who shouldn't be alone in the world. He tried to focus on the financial news, on company reports, on new investment proposals, but the words danced before his eyes, replaced by the image of small, bare feet on the cold ground. When he finally went to bed, sleep wouldn't come. Meanwhile, A few miles away, Sophia and Miguel shivered under the soaked awning. The rain had turned into a storm, and leaks in their makeshift roof were drenching the blanket, already insufficient against the growing October chill. Miguel coughed more frequently, and Sophia could feel his small body burning with fever. She held him close, softly humming the lullabies her mother used to sing before she disappeared from their lives. They were fragments of sweet memories in the midst of their current nightmare. "Sophia," Miguel murmured between shivers, "I'm thirsty." She looked around desperately. A puddle of rainwater was forming on the sidewalk, but she knew it wasn't safe to drink. She remembered a public water fountain she'd seen in a park 2 blocks away, but that would mean going out in the downpour with a feverish Miguel. "Just hold on a little longer, Miguel," she whispered, kissing her brother's hot forehead. "When the rain stops, we'll get some fresh water." But the rain didn't stop. It intensified, bringing icy winds that cut through their skin like razors. Sophia felt desperation rising in her chest. What if Miguel got really sick? What if she couldn't take care of him? What if, "Hey, you two, get out of here!" The harsh voice made them jump. A night security guard was approaching with a flashlight, illuminating the 2 huddled siblings. He was a large man in a black uniform with a stern expression. "You can't stay here. You're scaring the customers," he continued, showing no pity for their terrified young faces. "Please, sir," Sophia pleaded, shielding Miguel with her body. "My brother is sick, just until the rain passes." "Not my problem. There are shelters for people like you. Go there or I'm calling the cops." Sophia knew they couldn't go back to the shelters. Every time they tried, they wanted to separate them. Miguel to a foster family, she to a group home for older kids. She would rather face the streets 1,000 times than lose the only family she had left. She helped Miguel to his feet, grabbed the bag with the remaining pastries, and they stepped out into the storm. The boy could barely walk, leaning heavily on his sister. With every step, Sophia felt like she was failing as his protector. They found another spot, a gap under a building staircase, but the frigid wind was still biting. Miguel was shivering so hard his teeth were chattering audibly, and his cough echoed sadly in the empty dawn. Sophia looked up at the dark sky and, for the first time since they had left home months ago, allowed tears to flow freely down her face. They were tears of exhaustion, of fear, of a responsibility too heavy for her 8 years. In that moment, without knowing it, her thoughts turned to the kind man from the patisserie. Did people like him really exist? Would anyone in the world care if 2 children disappeared in the storm? The dawn dragged on, slow and cruel, testing the endurance of 2 small hearts that refused to give up on each other. Dawn brought a timid sun that could barely warm the frigid air. Richard woke up after a restless night, haunted by fragmented dreams of a sad-eyed girl handing him old sneakers. For the first time in decades, he cancelled his morning meeting and left the house early, driving aimlessly through the downtown streets. He wouldn't admit it to himself, but he was looking for Sophia and Miguel. He drove past the patisserie, past the spot where he had met her the day before, past the nearby corners. Nothing. The streets were busy with the morning commute, hurried executives, students rushing to school. Normal life pulsed on while he searched for 2 children who seemed to have dissolved into the urban landscape. And then he saw her. Sophia was sitting at the entrance of a closed pharmacy, holding Miguel in her lap. The boy looked smaller than the day before, curled up against his sister, breathing with difficulty. Even from a distance, Richard could see something was wrong. He double-parked his car and approached slowly, as if not to frighten a wounded animal. Sophia looked up as she saw him, and he was shocked by what he found in her eyes: fear, exhaustion, and a profound despair that no child should ever carry. "Sophia, how are you two?" "Miguel is really sick," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "He's had a fever since yesterday and he can't stop coughing. I don't know what to do." Richard knelt before them, observing the boy. Miguel opened his eyes with effort. struggling to focus on the man's face. His cheeks were flushed with fever, and his breathing was ragged. "You need a doctor," Richard said, feeling an urgency he didn't even experience in his most important business deals. "I don't have any money," Sophia confessed, lowering her head. "And at the hospitals, they ask too many questions. They might separate us." The simplicity of that explanation hit Richard like a punch. Here was an 8-year-old girl making an impossible calculation. Her brother's life versus the fear of losing him to the system. How had these children's lives come to this? "What if I take you as a family friend?" Sophia studied him intently, those two old eyes trying to decipher his intentions. "Why would you do that for us? You don't even know us." The question echoed in the morning silence. Why was he? Richard couldn't answer with logic. He just felt it was the right thing to do. "Maybe because you reminded me of something I forgot a long time ago," he said, surprised by the honesty of his own words. Before Sophia could reply, Miguel was seized by a violent coughing fit that left him gasping for breath. The decision was made in that instant. "Let's go," Richard said, scooping Miguel into his arms. The boy weighed less than a 5-year-old should, and he was burning up. "And my car is right there. I know a doctor who can help." Sophia hesitated for only a second before following, carrying the bag with the remaining pastries. In that moment, she was taking the greatest leap of faith of her short life, trusting the kindness of a stranger when all she had ever known from the adult world was abandonment and rejection. In the car, as Richard drove quickly toward the private clinic of Dr. Miller, his personal physician, a delirious Miguel murmured, "Sophia, don't leave me, please." "I'll never leave you, Mig," she whispered, holding her brother's small, hot hand. "Never." Richard adjusted the rearview mirror to watch the two siblings in the back seat, feeling he was witnessing a pure and unbreakable love. He pressed harder on the accelerator, knowing he was racing against time and against something much bigger than a simple illness. He was racing to save more than Miguel's life. He was fighting to preserve the last shred of hope left for 2 lost children in the world. Dr. Miller's clinic was in an elegant building on the Upper East Side, with a marble reception area and ornamental plants that contrasted brutally with the appearance of the 2 children Richard carried in. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with gold-rimmed glasses, frowned as she saw them enter. "Mr. Sterling, we didn't have an appointment for you today," she said, clearly uncomfortable with Sophia and Miguel's presence. "It's an emergency, Mrs. Gable," Richard replied, holding Miguel, who continued to murmur deliriously. "Please, tell Dr. Miller I need to speak with him urgently." The woman hesitated, looking from Richard to the dirty, ragged children. "But sir, these children... Perhaps it would be better to go to a public health clinic." Richard felt his blood boil. "Mrs. Gable, these children need medical attention now. Dr. Miller will want to see them." Sophia, sensing the tension, tugged on Richard's suit jacket. "Maybe we should go," she whispered. "We don't want to cause any trouble." "You're not going anywhere," Richard said firmly, heading straight for the doctor's office. He knocked and entered without waiting for a response. Dr. Miller was a man in his 60s, with graying hair and reading glasses hanging around his neck. He had known Richard for over a decade and had never seen him so agitated. When he looked up from the papers he was examining, he found his most influential patient carrying a feverish child, followed by a girl who looked like she had stepped out of a movie about urban poverty. "Richard, what's going on?" "Henry, this child needs immediate attention. He has a high fever and a worrying cough for over a day." The doctor, despite his surprise, reacted professionally. He pointed to the examination table and began to examine Miguel, who struggled weakly between consciousness and delirium. Sophia stood by his side, holding her brother's hand and whispering words of encouragement. "How long has he been like this?" Dr. Miller asked, using his stethoscope to listen to Miguel's chest. "It started last night," Sophia answered timidly. First it was just a little cough, but then it got like this. The doctor continued the exam in silence, checking his temperature, observing his inflamed throat, testing his reflexes. His expression gradually grew more serious. Richard felt his stomach clench. It's early-stage pneumonia, Dr. Miller diagnosed after several long minutes. Nothing that can't be treated. But he needs medication immediately and constant care for the next few days. Is he going to be okay? Sophia asked, her eyes welling up. He's going to be just fine, the doctor smiled gently. But he needs to take his medicine properly and get a lot of rest. No sleeping outside or getting chilled. Sophia lowered her head, and Richard immediately understood the problem. How could they ensure Miguel rested and recovered if they had nowhere to stay? Doctor. Miller also sized up the situation. He exchanged a meaningful look with Richard as he wrote the prescriptions. Richard, can I speak with you for a moment? In private. They stepped into the hallway, leaving Sophia holding the hand of Miguel, who had fallen asleep after receiving a fever reducer. Listen, Richard, I don't know what your relationship is with these children, but they aren't just sick, they're malnourished. Clearly have been living on the streets for weeks. The boy needs medical care, but more than that, he needs a home. I know, Richard murmured, running a hand through his hair. I just don't know how to help without making things worse. The girl is afraid of being separated from her brother, isn't she? Richard nodded. They only have each other. Dr. Miller sighed deeply. Look, I'll be straight with you. If I'm required to notify Child Protective Services, and I will have to if they go back to the streets, these kids will likely be separated. That's the reality of the system. And if there's an alternative, what kind of alternative? Richard looked through the glass of the door, seeing Sophia softly humming to Miguel, who was smiling faintly in his sleep. In that moment, he made a decision that would change everything. Doom, what if someone takes responsibility for them? Temporarily, someone who can guarantee medical care and a safe place. Dr. Miller studied Richard's face intently. Are you sure you know what you're doing, my friend? Richard looked at the children again, feeling something definitively settle in his chest. For the first time in years, I'm absolutely sure. Richard left the pharmacy with 2 bags full of medication, vitamins, and nutritional supplements. Beside him, Sophia walked in silence, carrying Miguel, who was still drowsy from the medicine. The girl hadn't questioned him when he said he would take them to his home until Miguel gets better, but her eyes revealed a mixture of hope and fear that was heartbreaking. The doorman of Richard's building nearly choked on his coffee when he saw them enter the marble lobby. Mr. Sterling, known for his solitary life and immutable routine, was arriving with 2 street children. But something in the businessman's determined gaze made him simply nod politely and call the elevator. In the apartment, Sophia and Miguel froze at the entrance. It was like stepping into another world. Soft carpets, gleaming furniture, paintings on the walls, a television bigger than some of the places they had slept in. But what impressed them most was the cozy silence, so different from the constant noise of the streets. You can come in, Richard smiled. Noticing their hesitation, this is your home now. For how long? Sophia asked directly, her life experience having taught her never to be fooled by temporary promises. Richard knelt in front of her, just as he had the first time they met. Sophia, I need to tell you something. My name is Richard, and for a long time, I haven't felt like part of a family. The girl watched him intently, trying to decipher the meaning of his words. When I met you yesterday, you reminded me that there are things more important than money. Miguel needs to get well, you need to be a kid again, and I need to learn how to be human again. Miguel, still weak but more alert after the medication, tugged on Richard's shirt sleeve. Are you going to be our daddy? He asked with the devastating simplicity of a 5-year-old. The question echoed in the silent apartment. Richard felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he hadn't experienced since his own childhood. He looked at Sophia, who was biting her lower lip, clearly torn between desire and the fear of another disappointment. "I don't know how this is all going to work yet," Richard said honestly. "But I know I don't want you to go back to the streets. I know Miguel needs to heal completely. And I know you both deserve so much more than what life has offered you so far." At that moment, his cell phone rang. It was Helen, his sister, the only family member with whom he still maintained sporadic contact. He hesitated, then answered. "Richard, where are you? Marcus called me and said you cancelled all your meetings today with no explanation. What's going on?" Richard looked at Sophia helping Miguel sit on the leather sofa, at the medications spread across the coffee table, at the entire domestic scene he had never imagined having in his home. "Helen, can you come over? I need to introduce you to two very special people." "Special people? Richard, are you okay?" "I'm better than I've been in years," he replied, watching Sophia discover a photography book on the table. "Helen, you remember when we were kids and dreamed of having a big, loud family? Richard, you're scaring me. Just come, please. And Helen, bring kids a clothes." "Size 8 for a girl and 5 for a boy." He hung up before his sister could ask any more questions. Sophia had stopped flipping through the book and was watching him with curiosity. "Was that your family?" she asked. "That's my sister. She's going to want to meet you. What if she doesn't like us?" Richard moved closer and, for the first time, dared to gently stroke the girl's tangled hair. "Impossible. You're impossible not to like." Sophia smiled shyly, the first truly relaxed smile he had seen from her. Miguel had fallen asleep on the sofa, breathing more regularly, and for the first time in days, he seemed genuinely at peace. Looking at the scene, the children in his living room, the medicines that would ensure Miguel's recovery, the prospect of Helen arriving soon, Richard understood that he had crossed an invisible line. He was no longer just temporarily helping two children. He was building a family. Helen arrived 2 hours later, carrying bags of children's clothes and an expression that mixed concern with curiosity. At 48, she was an elegant, practical woman, accustomed to solving the problems her brother created in his business dealings. But this situation was completely outside her experience. When Richard opened the door, Helen immediately saw the two children on the sofa. Sophia was reading a book in a low voice to Miguel, who was absently playing with a remote control. The scene was so domestic and natural that it took her a few seconds to process what she was seeing. "Richard, I need an explanation. Now," she said in a low voice, pulling her brother into the hallway. "There's Sophia and Miguel. She's 8. He's 5. They've been alone in the world for months, sleeping on the streets. Miguel had pneumonia. And what are they doing in your house? They're living here." Helen blinked several times, as if she hadn't heard correctly. "What do you mean, living here? Richard, you can't just pick up children off the street like they're stray animals." "It didn't happen like that," he replied, feeling his irritation rise. "It was different. They moved me in a way I can't explain." "Moved you how? Richard, you don't even like children. You never wanted kids, always said they were too loud, too complicated." Helen's words echoed down the hall, and they both realized the children might have heard. Sophia appeared shyly at the living room doorway, confirming their fears. "Sorry to bother you," she murmured, "but Miguel is asking if he can have some water, and I wanted to thank you for the clothes." Helen looked at the girl, thin, with intelligent eyes and an impressive dignity despite her situation, and felt something soften in her chest. "Of course you can have water, sweetie. And the clothes? Well, I hope they fit." When Sophia went back to Miguel, Helen turned to Richard. "She heard our conversation. So what? Better she knows now that not everyone is going to approve of this. Richard, be realistic. You're 52 years old. You've never even taken care of a goldfish. You know nothing about raising children. And these children, they have trauma, special needs. They'll need psychological support. Then I'll learn. I'll hire professional help. I'll do whatever it takes. And your work, your company, you spend 12 hours a day at the office. I'll change." Helen studied her brother's face, looking for signs of the stubborn determination she had known since childhood. It was all there, the set jaw, the eyes shining with a conviction she hadn't seen in years. "Listen, Richard, I'm not telling you to abandon these children, but maybe it's better to find a suitable family for them, someone who really knows." "No!" Richard's voice was firm as steel. "They've been through enough abandonment. I won't be one more person who lets them down." They returned to the living room, where Sophia had managed to make Miguel laugh with some silly game. The boy looked better. His color had returned, and his laughter was the most joyful sound that had ever echoed in that apartment. Helen watched the interaction between the siblings, then looked at Richard, watching the scene with an expression she had never seen before, pure, unguarded tenderness. "Richard," she said more softly, "I understand you want to help, but this isn't a business project you can solve with planning and resources. These are traumatized children who need emotional stability." "That's exactly why I can't give up on them," he answered. "Helen, for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing something that truly matters." Sophia looked in their direction, sensing the tension. She took Miguel by the hand and approached hesitantly. "If you don't want us to stay here, we can leave," she said directly to Helen. "We don't want to cause a fight in your family." The simplicity and maturity of those words, coming from an 8-year-old, left Helen speechless. Sophia continued, "But Mr. Sterling has been very good to us. Miguel is better because of him. And we don't have anyone else." Helen looked at this brave girl protecting her younger brother, at Richard discovering a late-in-life fatherhood, at Miguel trusting adults for the first time in months. Maybe, she thought, some changes were worth all the risks. The following days brought a completely new routine to Richard's apartment. For the first time in decades, he woke up to children's voices, muffled laughter, and the sound of bare feet running down the marble hallway. Miguel recovered quickly with the right medication and care, while Sophia slowly began to lower her emotional defenses. Helen, despite her initial reservations, had become a frequent visitor. She brought children's books, helped with clothes, and gradually became charmed by Sophia's strong personality and Miguel's sweetness. But she still voiced constant practical concerns. "Richard, you need to enroll them in a school," she said on a Thursday morning, watching Sophia teach Miguel how to write his name in a notebook she had bought. "And you need to get their paperwork in order. Do they have birth certificates? Immunization records?" Sophia looked up from the notebook. Since arriving, she had developed a habit of listening to all adult conversations, always alert for signs that something might go wrong. "We have our papers," she said timidly. "They're in a backpack we hid under a bridge. I can show you where." Richard's chest tightened. Even here, in safety, the children kept their belongings hidden on the street, ready to flee at a moment's notice. It was a painful reminder of how much distrust they would have to overcome. "Let's go get them together," he proposed, "and then we'll talk about school. Would you like to study?" Sophia's eyes lit up for the first time since she had arrived. "I'd really love to go back to school. I can read well, and I'm teaching Miguel. But the other times we tried to go to school." "What happened?" Helen asked gently. "They asked too many questions. Where we were from, where we lived, who took care of us, and when they found out we were alone, they called Child Protective Services," Richard completed, understanding. Sophia nodded sadly. "And they wanted to separate us. They always wanted to separate us." Miguel, who had stopped writing to listen, moved closer to his sister. "But now we have Uncle Richard," he said with the innocent confidence of childhood. "He won't let anyone separate us." The word uncle made Richard's heart leap. It was the first time the children had called him anything other than sir or by his name. It represented a level of intimacy and trust he didn't know if he deserved, but one he desperately wanted to honor. "I will never let anyone separate you," he promised, kneeling beside the children. "But to do that, we need to do everything by the book. Paperwork, school, regular doctor's visits." Do you trust me? Sophia studied him intently for long seconds. Richard could see the conflict in her eyes, the desire to trust battling against years of disappointment and abandonment. Do you really promise? She finally asked. I promise, Richard said, extending his pinky finger as he'd seen in movies. Pinky promise. Sophia smiled for the first time since arriving, linking her tiny finger with his. Miguel copied the gesture, and the three of them were connected by that childish promise which, for them, was worth more than any legal contract. Helen watched the scene from a distance, her own eyes welling up. Maybe her brother really did know what he was doing. Maybe these children were exactly what he had always needed, and he was exactly what they deserved. Then it's decided, Richard announced. Tomorrow we'll get your papers, then we'll find a good school, and on the weekend we'll buy everything you need for your own room. We're going to have a real room, Miguel asked, incredulous. You're going to have everything every child deserves to have, Richard answered, feeling that each word was a sacred promise. That night, when the children finally fell asleep on the living room sofa, they still refused to sleep in separate rooms. Richard watched them for long minutes. Sophia kept a protective arm around Miguel even in sleep, and the boy nestled against his sister like a cub seeking safety. They were two children who had grown up too fast, taken on responsibilities too heavy, suffered losses too great. But they still held within them the capacity to love, to trust, to dream, and he would do everything to protect that precious light that shone in their hearts. The Hamilton Public School was a 15-minute drive from Richard's apartment and seemed perfect for Sophia and Miguel. It had a large playground, well-lit classrooms, and a principal, Miss Evans, who greeted them with a warm smile. But the smile faded when she started asking the standard questions. Are the children's documents in order? She asked, flipping through the papers Richard had organized after retrieving the backpack from under the bridge. Yes, birth certificates, immunization records, school records from when they were last regularly enrolled, Richard answered, feeling Sophia shrink beside him. And you are their legal guardian, Richard said, the phrase coming out more confidently than he felt. Miss Evans frowned. Legal guardian how? Father? Uncle? Court-appointed guardian? Richard hesitated. It was the question he had dreaded, because the honest answer was none of the above, legally. He was nothing to these children but a kind-hearted man who had taken them in. The children are under my temporary care, he explained. We are in the process of arranging the appropriate legal documentation. I see, Ms. Evans said, but her tone had cooled considerably. Mr. Sterling, please understand my position. I cannot enroll children without the proper legal paperwork. If something happens to them, if someone comes to claim custody, the school could be in serious trouble. Sophia tugged on Richard's jacket. Can we go now? She whispered, clearly uncomfortable with the turn of the conversation. No, Richard said firmly. We're going to solve this. He turned to the principal. Ms. Evans, these children have missed months of education living on the streets. They deserve a chance to return to normalcy. I take full responsibility for them. Sir, I would love to help. But I have to follow protocol. Without formalized legal guardianship, I cannot accept their enrollment. Outside the school, Richard watched Sophia comfort Miguel, who had started to cry softly when he realized they couldn't study there. The girl kept her composure, but he saw the disappointment in her eyes. Don't worry, he said, kneeling beside them. We'll find another school. It won't work, Sophia murmured. It will always be the same. We don't really exist on paper. The phrase hit Richard like a punch. We don't really exist on paper. How could two children feel that way? How could bureaucracy be more important than the basic right to an education? That afternoon, he called Dr. Miller and asked for a recommendation for a family law attorney. 2 hours later, he was in the office of Mrs. Freitas, a determined woman in her 40s, who listened to his story with growing attention. "Mr. Sterling, what you've done is admirable, but legally it's a complex situation," she explained. "To become their legal guardian, you need to file a petition with the family court. That could take months." "Months?" he repeated, incredulous. "And in the meantime, what are they? Invisible?" "Not exactly. We can file for temporary custody, which would grant you some temporary rights. But even so, Child Protective Services will need to conduct a full evaluation." Richard felt his stomach turn cold. "What kind of evaluation?" "They'll investigate your financial and psychological state, the suitability of your home for children. They'll interview Sophia and Miguel separately, and they will question why a 50-year-old single man with no history with children suddenly wants to take responsibility for 2 homeless children." The silence hung heavy in the elegant office. Richard understood that his good deed was being viewed with suspicion, that his generosity would be questioned and dissected by bureaucrats who had never slept in the cold or felt hunger. "How long do we have before the evaluation?" "If we file the papers tomorrow, maybe 2 weeks. 2 weeks to prove he deserved to care for the children he already loved as his own. 2 weeks to convince strangers that Sophia and Miguel were better off with him than anywhere else." "Miss Freitas, I have to ask a difficult question. What are the real chances I'll get permanent custody?" The lawyer sighed. "Honestly, 50-50, maybe less. The system prefers traditional families, married couples, people with proven experience with children. A single man, it always raises questions." Richard left the office with more papers to sign, more fees to pay, more obstacles to overcome, but also with an iron determination growing in his chest. If the system wanted to question his love for Sophia and Miguel, so be it. If bureaucracies wanted to stand in the way of their happiness, let them try. He would fight with all his strength to keep the family that fate had given him. A gift in the form of a brave girl offering worn-out shoes for a piece of cake. The news leaked somehow. Richard never found out exactly how, but on a Monday morning, his phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists, curious onlookers, even some business rivals wanted to know about the millionaire tycoon who adopted street kids. The words were laden with thinly veiled judgment and malicious speculation. "At a day, Richard Sterling creates controversy by taking in homeless minors," read the headline of the local paper. "Single businessman's motives questioned," added another outlet. Sophia read the articles online one morning when Richard thought she was playing games on the tablet. When he returned from the bakery with fresh bread, he found the girl sitting on the sofa, silent tears streaming down her face. "Sophia, what happened?" She showed him the screen, where a photo of them entering his building illustrated a speculative article about his intentions. "They're saying you only took us in to look good, that it's all a lie." Richard felt a deep rage burn in his chest. He took the tablet from her hands and sat beside her. "Sophia, look at me," he said, lifting the girl's chin. "Who cares what they say? Do you know why I'm taking care of you? Because we're a family now." "Exactly. And families protect each other, no matter what other people say." But the situation quickly worsened. Marcus Thorne, his oldest business partner, showed up at the apartment on a Tuesday afternoon with a grim expression and a folder full of newspaper clippings. "Richard, we need to talk seriously." They shut themselves in the office while Sophia and Miguel watched television in the living room. Miguel had fully recovered from his pneumonia, but Sophia had become quieter and more watchful since the articles started appearing. "The shareholders are worried," Marcus began. "This story is generating negative press for the company. Some clients are questioning your emotional stability, your ability to make rational decisions." "Emotional stability," Richard repeated, incredulous. "For taking care of 2 children, for doing it so impulsively, Richard, you changed overnight." You cancelled important meetings, altered your routine, took in two strange children and brought them home. To people who only know Richard the businessman, it looks like what? It looks like a breakdown, a midlife crisis. I don't know, a dangerous emotional decision. Richard stood up abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked the city. Down below, people went about their normal, predictable lives, secure in their judgments and prejudices. Marcus, for the first time in my life, I wake up wanting to get out of bed. For the first time, I feel like I'm doing something that actually matters. And you come here to talk to me about worried shareholders. Richard, be practical. If you lose the company, how are you going to support these children? They need financial stability, too. The question hit a vulnerable spot. Richard knew Marcus was partly right. Sophia and Miguel deserved material security as well. But the idea of backing down, of giving them up to please investors, was unthinkable. What are you proposing? Marcus sighed. That you resolve this situation quickly. Find a suitable family for the children. Go back to your normal routine. Show everyone you're still the focused, rational businessman you've always been. And if I don't, the majority shareholders will call an emergency meeting. They could challenge your leadership, your fitness, to continue as CEO. The words echoed in the silent office. Richard looked through the glass of the door, seeing Sophia teaching Miguel how to make origami. The girl had taught herself by watching videos online and was now passing the knowledge to her brother with infinite patience. While you know what I've learned from these children, Marcus, that there's something more important than profit, more valuable than the approval of others. There's unconditional love. Richard, if I lose the company for loving two children, then maybe that's the price I have to pay. Marcus stood up, putting the papers back in his folder. You have 1 week to decide. After that, I can't guarantee what will happen. After his partner left, Richard remained alone in his office, feeling the weight of the decisions he had to make. Outside, he heard Miguel's crystal-clear laugh and Sophia's sweet voice telling a story. They were the only sounds in the world that mattered. The evaluation from Child Protective Services came on a rainy Thursday, exactly 2 weeks after the visit to Mrs. Freitas's office. Richard had spent the preceding days organizing everything in the apartment, buying furniture for the children's room, preparing documents, and trying to control the anxiety that grew with each passing hour. Sophia was even quieter than usual, and Miguel, sensing the adults' tension, had started having nightmares again. The night before the evaluation, Richard found them asleep together in the living room, holding each other as they had in the early days, as if they sensed something important was about to happen. The social worker, Ms. Souza, arrived at 9 o'clock sharp, accompanied by a psychology intern. She was a serious woman with glasses and a highly organized briefcase, who examined every room in the apartment with a clinical eye. Apartment is suitable, well located, excellent hygiene conditions, she murmured to the intern, making notes on a clipboard. Separate rooms for the children, educational toys, balanced nutrition. But Richard knew the physical inspection was just the beginning. The real test was next. Mr. Sterling, I need to ask you some personal questions, Mrs. Souza said, sitting in the living room with a formal posture. Why did you decide to take in these children? Because they needed help. And I needed them too. What do you mean, you needed them? Richard took a deep breath. It was time for total honesty. Mrs. Souza, I lived 52 years thinking only about work and money. I thought that was enough. When I met Sophia and Miguel, I discovered I was empty inside. They taught me how to feel again. The social worker made more notes, and your plans for their future. A quality private school, regular medical checkups, psychological therapy if needed. I want them to have every opportunity they've missed. And your prior experience with children? None, Richard admitted, but I'm learning. Helen, my sister, is helping me, and the children themselves teach me every day. Next, it was the children's turn to be interviewed separately. Miguel went in first, nervous but confident. Richard waited in the hallway, trying not to imagine the questions being asked. When it was Sophia's turn, she stopped at the door and looked at Richard. "Is everything going to be okay?" she asked with that heartbreaking maturity. "It will," he promised, wishing he felt more certain than he let on. Sophia's interview lasted 40 minutes. When she came out, her eyes were red, but she walked tall with dignity. Richard knew she had fought for them the only way an 8-year-old could, with honesty and courage. "Mr. Sterling," Ms. Souza called, "I need to inform you that our evaluation will take a few days to complete. Until then, the children may remain in your care, but an anonymous tip was filed questioning your motives. Someone suggested that you are using the children to improve your public image after financial troubles at your company." Richard's blood ran cold. Financial troubles? According to the tip, you're facing business difficulties and using this situation as a PR stunt. The irony was cruel. His financial troubles had started precisely because he was prioritizing the children over the company. Someone had completely twisted the situation. "Mrs. Souza, may I know who made this complaint?" "Anonymous means anonymous, Mr. Sterling. But I am required to investigate. If it's proven that there are improper motives..." She didn't finish the sentence, but the message was clear. Richard understood that someone was playing dirty, using the system against him. That night, after the social workers had left, Richard sat with Sophia and Miguel in the living room. The children were quiet, processing the evaluation experience. What did they ask you?" Richard wanted to know. "If you were nice to us," Miguel answered. "I said yes, that you buy me medicine when I'm sick and read stories before bed." "And you, Sophia?" The girl hesitated. "They asked if I would rather be in a family with a mom and a dad. If it wasn't weird, living just with you." Richard felt his chest tighten. "And what did you say?" Sophia looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I said that family isn't about having a mom and a dad. It's about having someone who never leaves you, and that you're the only person who never tried to separate us." In that moment, Richard knew he would fight to the end. It didn't matter if he lost his company, his money, his reputation. He would not let these children return to a life of abandonment. But deep in his heart, for the first time, he was afraid his love might not be enough against a system that seemed determined to tear them apart. The phone call came 3 days after the evaluation. On a Monday Richard would never forget. Ms. Souza was on the other end of the line, her tone unreadable, not entirely positive, not completely negative. "Mr. Sterling, I need to see you today. Some information has come to light that changes our evaluation." His heart pounded. "What kind of information?" "It's better if we speak in person. Can you come to the office at 2 this afternoon and bring the children?" The next few hours dragged on like centuries. Sophia sensed the tension and stayed close to Miguel, psychologically preparing him for any news. At 8 years old, she already knew that adults had the power to shatter children's worlds with just a few words. At the CPS office, they were led to a larger room than usual. Besides Ms. Souza, other professionals were present, and to Richard's surprise, Mrs. Freitas, his lawyer, whom he hadn't called, "Mr. Sterling," Miss Souza began. "We received additional information regarding your case that I felt it was important to share." She opened a folder and took out several sheets of paper. First, regarding the anonymous tip. "We discovered it was made by a man who identified himself as a concerned business partner. We investigated and confirmed it was Mr. Marcus Thorne." Richard felt a mix of anger and disappointment. Marcus had used the system against him, trying to force him to abandon the children. "Second," Mrs. Souza continued, "we received unsolicited testimonials from several people. The owner of the patisserie where you met, Madame Dubois, called to tell us about that afternoon. Dr. Miller, your physician, made a point of attesting to the care with which you handled Miguel's health. Sophia and Miguel listened in silence, not fully understanding, but sensing that something important was happening. And there's more. Ms. Souza smiled for the first time. "Helen, your sister, came to see us." The door opened, and Helen entered. Carrying a thick folder and wearing a determined expression Richard recognized from their childhood, it was her war face. "Richard," she said, sitting beside her brother, "I hope you can forgive me for going behind your back. But when I heard about Marcus's tip, I decided to do my own investigation." She opened the folder, revealing dozens of documents. "I spoke with every employee at your company. I found out that since the children arrived, you've become a more humane, more understanding boss. The company's productivity has actually increased because people are more motivated." "Helen, I'm not finished," she smiled. "I also spoke with your neighbors, the doorman, the cleaning staff. They all confirmed the same thing. You've changed for the better, and the children are visibly happier and healthier." Miss Souza took over. "Mr. Sterling, based on all this additional investigation, our recommendation is to approve your petition for permanent custody." The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia squeezed Miguel's hand, and they both looked at Richard as if they didn't dare to believe it. "Does that mean," Richard began, his voice thick with emotion, "it means you are officially a family?" Mrs. Souza smiled. "Congratulations." Sophia let out a cry of joy and threw herself into Richard's arms, followed by Miguel. The three of them hugged right there, in the middle of the formal CPS office, crying and laughing at the same time. "There is just one condition," Mrs. Souza added. "Monthly psychological follow-ups for 6 months, just to ensure the adjustment continues to be positive." "I'll accept any condition," Richard said, not letting go of the children. Helen watched the scene with tears in her eyes. "There's one more surprise," she announced. "I spoke with the other shareholders. They were so impressed by your transformation that they've decided to remove Marcus from the board. You retain full control of the company." "And what if I don't want it anymore?" "What do you mean?" Helen asked, surprised. Richard looked at Sophia and Miguel, then at his sister. "What if I decided there's something more important than the company? What if I wanted to dedicate myself completely to being a father?" Helen smiled. "Then I would take over management for you. I've always wanted to prove I can run a business just as well as stubborn men." They left the CPS office as an official family. On the street, Sophia stopped and looked up at Richard with those eyes that had seen too much suffering, but now shone with pure hope. "Can I call you Dad now?" she asked shyly. Richard knelt on the sidewalk, just as he had on that first day at the Patisserie Guy, and pulled her into a tight hug. "You can call me whatever you want. You're my children forever." Miguel, not wanting to be left out, joined the hug, shouting "Daddy" with infectious joy. There, on the busy sidewalk, 3 people who had been touched by loneliness finally discovered the true meaning of home. 6 weeks had passed since that first meeting at La Belle Époque Patisserie. On a golden November afternoon, Richard walked hand in hand with Sophia and Miguel along the same cobblestone sidewalk where it all began. The autumn leaves still danced in the wind, but now they carried promises of spring. Miguel wore new sneakers and his uniform from the Montessori school, where he had adapted quickly and made friends for the first time in his life. His laughter echoed down the street as he told them about his science class, where they had planted beans in yogurt cups. Sophia, more reserved but equally happy, carried a backpack full of books and drawings she made to decorate the room she now called her own. "Dad," she said, the word still new but feeling more natural each time, "can we stop at the patisserie? I want to show Madame Dubois my essay about family." Richard smiled. Sophia had written a beautiful piece about how families could be born in the most unexpected ways, and she had gotten a perfect grade. Her teacher said she had never read anything so touching from an 8-year-old. The door of La Belle Époque opened with the same familiar chime, but now the sound brought sweet memories instead of loneliness. Madame Dubois looked up from the display case she was arranging, and her face lit up when she saw them. "Mes enfants," she exclaimed, coming around the counter to hug the children. "How you are growing!" "I brought something for you," Sophia said shyly, handing her the essay. "It's about our family." As Madame Dubois read the text aloud, her French accent thick with emotion, Richard watched the scene that would have seemed impossible months ago. Here were his children, safe, loved, telling their stories with pride instead of hiding them in shame. "And what will you have today?" Madame Dubois asked, carefully putting the essay aside. "I still have those cupcakes you love so much." "Actually," Richard said, "we want to celebrate. The final adoption papers came through this morning." Miguel started jumping with joy. "Now we're a real family on paper too." "Ah, but you were always a family in the heart," Madame Dubois smiled, taking a special box from the display. "This one is on the house, to celebrate love." It was a small but elaborate cake, decorated with 3 chocolate figures representing a man and 2 children holding hands. Richard felt his eyes well up at the care she had taken to prepare the surprise. They left the patisserie carrying the cake and headed home, where Helen was waiting for a celebratory dinner. On the way, they passed the corner where Sophia and Miguel had slept on that terrible, stormy night. Richard paused for a moment, looking at the spot. "What is it, Dad?" Sophia asked. Following his gaze, "I was just thinking," he said, "about how quickly life can change. A few weeks ago, you were there, alone in the world, and I was alone too, without even knowing it. But now we've found each other." Sophia completed with the wisdom of an old soul. "We have," Richard agreed, pulling them both closer, "and we'll never be alone again." At home, Helen had prepared a surprise party. Dr. Miller and his wife were there, Ms. Freitas with her teenage children, and even Mrs. Gable from the clinic, who had apologized for her initial prejudice and had become a sort of adoptive grandmother to the children. During dinner, Miguel raised his small juice glass and made a toast with the comical seriousness of a child imitating adults. "Thank you, Daddy Richard, for not giving up on us. And thank you, Sophia, for always taking care of me." Sophia, emotional, hugged her brother. "Thank you for being you, Miga. And thank you, Dad, for showing us there are still good people in the world." Richard raised his glass, looking at the smiling faces around the table. "Thank you both for teaching me that true wealth isn't what we can buy, but what we can offer. For showing me that family isn't about blood, but about choice. And for proving that love can be born in the most unexpected places." Later that night, when the children had fallen asleep in their own rooms, still together, but now by choice and not necessity, Richard stood in the living room, looking at the photos that were beginning to fill the shelves. Sophia learning to ride a bike, Miguel on his first day of school, the 3 of them together in the park, Helen teaching Sophia how to cook. A lifetime of memories was being built, one happy moment at a time. He picked up the old sneakers that Sophia had offered him on that transformative afternoon, which he now kept on a special shelf. They were even more worn now, but they represented the exact moment when 3 lost souls found their way back home. Outside, the city continued its nightly dance, full of lonely people who perhaps didn't yet know that a simple act of kindness could change everything. But inside that apartment, peace finally reigned, the peace of someone who had discovered that the truest happiness comes from hearts open to unexpected love. And in the kitchen, on the table, rested an empty box that once held the most expensive cake from the fanciest patisserie in the city, but was now just a common sweet compared to the infinite sweetness of having a family to call his own.